The message came from a buyer. Not a close friend, not a colleague who might have softened at first. A retail buyer named Park Jae-soo from Lot's fashion division. A woman Abena had been cultivating for 8 months. A professional relationship she'd been careful with, the kind that required a certain sustained impression to stay intact. The message was 4 words and a link. Is this about you? Abena was in her studio when it arrived, standing at the long cutting table where she'd spent the better part of 6 years building something from nothing, fabric swatches pinned to the corkboard behind her, her original concept sketches framed in a grid along the left wall, the particular organized chaos of a creative space that belonged entirely to the person who'd made it. Her phone was face up beside a half-finished technical drawing. She saw the message, tapped the link, and watched the page load. Shin Do-yeon, the man who reinvented Korean fashion for the global market. Seoul Style magazine, their largest feature of the year. 11 pages, she could tell from the page count indicator. 11 pages about the founding and rise of the label she had built from a concept sketch on the back of a napkin in a coffee shop in Accra before she'd ever set foot in Korea. She scrolled to the cover first, because she recognized the image immediately. She'd been there when that photograph was taken, 18 months ago, at the brand's 3rd anniversary event, the one she'd art-directed herself, the one where the backdrop and the lighting and the arrangement of every visual element in the frame had been her decisions down to the last detail. Her own face looked back at her from the cover of Seoul Style magazine. Uncredited. She scrolled through the feature slowly, the way you read something when you already know what you're looking for and are hopping to be wrong. Shin Do-yeon's name appeared 14 times. His photograph, the one she'd selected from the shoot, in a jacket she'd chosen, against a background she'd designed, appeared on the opening spread, full page, the posture of a founder. Her name appeared 0 times. Not in the body of the feature, not in the image credits, not in the founding story he'd told the interviewer, in which the label had apparently been born fully formed from his own singular vision in the winter of 2019. The same winter Abena had arrived in Seoul with a portfolio, a 5-year plan, and the specific reckless certainty of a woman who'd spent her whole life building things in rooms that hadn't expected her. She set the phone face down on the cutting table. She stood there for a moment with her hands flat against the surface of the table where she'd done her best work, in the studio she'd designed, surrounded by the evidence of 6 years that a magazine had just decided hadn't happened. Then she picked the phone back up and typed 4 words back to the buyer. I'll call you Monday. Not because she had a plan yet, because she needed the buyer to know she was still standing before she figured out exactly how to stand. If you have ever had your name removed from something you built with your own hands, comment the word uncredited below. Comment if you've ever watched someone take credit for your work in a room full of people who didn't know enough to question it. Subscribe if you believe a woman written out of her own story deserves the chance to write the correction herself. Because Shin Do-yeon gave an 11-page interview about a label that wouldn't exist without the woman he didn't mention once. And what happened next was going to cost him considerably more than a correction in small print. Abena Mensah had not come to Seoul looking for a partner. She'd come looking for a market. She'd grown up in Accra, the eldest daughter of a textile trader whose warehouse had been the first landscape. She'd learned to read bolts of fabric organized by weight and weave and origin, the particular education of a child who learned color theory before algebra and understood drape before she understood grammar. Her mother had made clothes. Her father had sold the materials they were made from. Abena had grown up understanding, at a level that predated conscious thought, that fashion was not decoration. It was architecture. It was the decision, made every morning, about what kind of space a body was going to occupy in the world. She'd studied design in London, graduated with a portfolio that her thesis advisor had described as the most culturally specific and globally marketable work she'd seen from a student in 15 years, and spent 3 years working for a mid-level Paris house before deciding that working for other people's visions was the specific kind of slow suffocation she wasn't built for. She'd chosen Seoul for the reason serious fashion people chose Seoul in that decade. Because something was happening there that hadn't happened anywhere else yet. A collision of craft tradition and global appetite, and a generation of consumers who understood quality and wanted something that wasn't European by default. She'd arrived with enough savings to give herself 18 months, a portfolio she could defend in any room, and the name of one industry contact who turned out to be unavailable. She'd met Shin Do-yeon at an industry mixer in Itaewon, 3 weeks after landing, when she'd been nobody in particular in a city that didn't know her name. He was charming in the specific way of men who'd learned early that charm was a form of currency. Easy with a room, good at making whoever he was talking to feel like the most interesting person in it, the kind of attractive that came less from his face than from the quality of his attention. He had connections. She had vision. He knew which doors in Seoul opened and how hard to knock. She knew what to build once they were open. It had seemed, at the time, like a clean fit. She'd been wrong about cleaning. The fit had been real. The work they'd built together was genuinely good, genuinely hers in the ways that mattered. And she'd known that even after the relationship ended, even after the professional partnership had become complicated by the personal one collapsing, she'd told herself the work was bigger than either of those things. She'd been right about the work. She'd been wrong about him. The editor-in-chief of Seoul Style magazine was a woman named Kwon Mi-hee, and Abena had met her exactly once, 8 weeks earlier, at a brand event, where Mi-hee had found her specifically in a crowded room and said, with the directness of a woman who didn't use social occasions for anything less than real conversation, that she was planning a feature on the label's origin story and would like Abena's perspective as co-founder. Abena had thanked her and declined. She declined out of professional courtesy toward a partnership she'd told herself still functioned, a business relationship she hadn't wanted to complicate by giving a separate interview that might read as undermining Do-yeon's narrative before she knew what his narrative was. She understood now with the specific clarity of hindsight, extending a courtesy to a man who had been in that same magazine's offices for the past month telling a story in which she did not exist. She found Mi-hee's business card in her studio drawer that evening. She kept everything, a habit her father had installed early, the discipline of a woman who'd learned that paper trails were the difference between a version and a fact. She held the card for a long moment. Then she sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and began pulling files, the original concept deck from 2019, time-stamped by her cloud storage system at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in November, 3 weeks before Do-yeon had even seen it. The founding emails, her name in every thread, her creative direction in every decision. The portfolio of original sketches, each one dated in her own handwriting on the back because her father had taught her to date everything, every sketch, every swatch, every idea, because someday someone might need to know who thought of it first. She wasn't going to call Mi-hee tonight. She was going to be ready when she did. She worked until 2 a.m., organizing 4 years of evidence into a folder that told, without a single word of editorial, the complete and documented story of who had built what and when. Then she closed the laptop, looked at the concept sketches framed on her wall, her handwriting, her dates, her vision, and felt something settle in her chest that wasn't peace yet but was its early form. She had built this. Every time-stamped file in that folder said so. Tomorrow, she was going to make sure the right person knew how to read them. She called Mi-hee at 9 the next morning, because 9 was professional and 8 was desperate, and she was neither of those things, or wasn't going to perform either of those things, which amounted to the same result. Mi-hee picked up on the second ring. "I wondered how long it would take you to call," she said, without preamble, in the tone of a woman who'd been expecting this conversation and had already decided how she was going to conduct it. "You saw the feature," Abena said. "I edited the feature," Mi-hee said. "Every word of it, which means I also saw what wasn't in it." A brief pause, the kind that contained more information than most sentences. "I want you to know something before we go further. I reached out to you 8 weeks ago because I already knew the founding story didn't match what Shin was telling us. I had your name from 3 sources before I ever walked into that room with him, 2 retail buyers and a fabric supplier in Daegu who described you, specifically, as the creative architect of everything the label had produced. I invited you to participate because I wanted your version in the piece. When you declined, I had a decision to make. You ran it without me, Abena said, not an accusation, a fact being confirmed. I ran his version, Mihi said, because he'd given a formal on-record interview and you hadn't, and because I needed to see. I want to be honest with you about this, whether the industry would notice the gap. Whether anyone who knew this label's work would read 11 pages about its founding and feel something was missing. Abena was quiet for a moment, and my inbox, Mihi said, has 43 messages in it this morning, from designers, buyers, stylists, and 2 journalists who cover this industry. Every single one of them is a variation of the same question. Where is Abena Mensah in this story? Something moved through Abena's chest. Not triumph, not yet. The thing that came before triumph when you understood that the truth had been louder than the version told over it. I have files, Abena said. Original concept work, time-stamped, founding emails. My portfolio from the label's first 3 collections with dates. She paused. I didn't send them to you 8 weeks ago because I thought I was protecting something. I understand now that what I was protecting wasn't worth it. Send them today, Mihi said. All of it. I want the timestamps, I want the creative trail from the beginning, and I want to know because I need to ask this directly, whether you're willing to go on record this time. Your name, your voice, your account of the founding, not anonymous sourcing. You. Abena looked at the concept sketches on her studio wall, her handwriting, her dates. 6 years of visual decisions that had built a brand Seoul's fashion industry now recognized on sight. Yes, she said, I'm willing. Then I need everything by Wednesday, Mihi said. I want to run the follow-up in next month's issue. And Abena, she paused, and something in her voice shifted from editorial precision to something more direct. I've been at this magazine for 22 years. I've watched this specific story happen more times than I can count. A woman builds something, a man stands in front of it, and the industry writes the man's name above the door. I'm tired of printing that story. I've been tired of it for a decade. I'm not going to tell you this is justice, because justice would have meant your name in the original piece. But it's the best correction I know how to make, and I intend to make it as loudly as this magazine is capable of being loud. Abena set the phone down after the call ended and sat for a moment in her studio, in the specific quiet of a morning that had shifted its weight. She'd spent the previous night building the folder. She spent the next 2 days building something better, not just a chronological file dump, but a narrative told entirely through dates and documents. The kind of story that didn't require a single editorial claim, because the evidence made every claim itself. The original concept deck. November 2019, her cloud storage timestamp, her name in the document's authorship metadata. The founding emails. A chain stretching back to December of the same year, Do-yeon's early messages asking questions. What color story are you thinking for the first collection? Should the logo be serif or sans? What's the reference point for the silhouette? And Abena's answers, detailed and specific, the answers of a woman who already knew exactly what she was building and was bringing someone else up to speed on it. The sketches, every original, dated in her handwriting on the back. Every technical drawing, time-stamped in the design software's file history. Every mood board, saved with creation dates that predated the label's official founding by months. And the retail correspondence, emails between Abena and Park Jae-soo at Lot, between Abena and the buyer at Hyundai department store, between Abena and the buyer at a boutique concept store in Hongdae that had been their first stockist. Every relationship, every account, her name in every thread. She sent the folder to Mihi on Wednesday morning. 247 files, organized into 4 clearly labeled sections, with a cover note that was 3 sentences long. These are the original documents from the label's founding and first 4 years of operation. The timestamps and authorship metadata are unaltered. I am available for a formal interview at your convenience. No editorial, no argument, no anger visible on the surface of any of it, because she'd learned from her father, from London, from 6 years of being a black woman building things in rooms that hadn't been designed to credit her, That the most powerful thing she could put in front of someone was a fact that didn't need her to raise her voice for it. Mihi called Thursday afternoon. "I've been through all of it," she said. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly rather than carefully." "Go ahead," Abena said. "The retail accounts, Lot, Hyundai, the Hongdae boutique. Are those relationships yours personally, or are they attached to the label?" Abena understood the question immediately. It was a business question underneath the editorial one, and Mihi had been in this industry long enough to know the difference between a brand's institutional account and the personal relationship that had built it. "They're mine," Abena said. "Every initial meeting was mine. Every seasonal conversation has been mine. Do-yeon has met Park Jae-soo at Lot twice, both times with me present." She paused. "Why are you asking?" "Because the follow-up piece isn't just a correction," Mihi said. "It's a profile. Of you. Of your work, your vision, your account of the founding. And when it runs, the industry is going to look at that label differently. Some people in it are going to have to decide which side of the story they believe, and the accounts you've built personally are going to have to decide whether their relationship is with the label or with you." "I haven't thought about that yet," Abena said, which was true at that moment. "You should," Mihi said. "Not because I'm suggesting anything specific, because you spent 6 years building something, and the question of what you walk away from and what you take with you is one you deserve to answer for yourself, with full information, before anyone else starts answering it for you." She hung up, and Abena sat at her cutting table with her hands flat on the surface and thought about that for a long time. Do-yeon called that evening, which meant someone in Mihi's orbit had told him a follow-up piece was coming. He never called in the evenings otherwise. It wasn't his register, the evening call, too informal for the professional distance he'd installed between them after the relationship ended. She let it ring out. He called again 10 minutes later. She let that ring out too. He texted on the third attempt, "I think we should talk before anything else happens." She read it, set the phone face down on the cutting table beside her original concept deck, and went back to the technical drawing she'd been working on when the buyer's message had arrived 3 days ago. She had a follow-up interview with Mihi on Monday. She had a collection deadline in 6 weeks. She had 247 files sitting in an editor's inbox that told the complete story of who had built what and when, in a language nobody could edit or retitle or run without her name attached. She talked to Do-yeon when she was ready. She wasn't ready. She was working. Part 3 coming, the Monday interview with Mihi. What Do-yeon does when he realizes the follow-up is real, and the retail accounts begin to make their own decisions. The interview with Mihi lasted 3 hours. Not because Abena had prepared a performance. She hadn't, specifically, the way she hadn't performed anything in the 2 weeks since the buyer's message had arrived. She'd simply brought the truth and let it take as long as it needed. Which turned out to be 3 hours in Mihi's corner office on the 14th floor of the Seoul-style building, with a recorder on the table between them and a photographer who came in for the final 40 minutes and said almost nothing while he worked. Mihi asked questions the way she edited, precisely, without ornamentation, following the thread of each answer to its actual end before moving to the next one. She asked about Accra first, about the textile warehouse, about the education Abena had received before she'd received any formal one. She asked about London and Paris, about the decision to come to Seoul, about what she'd seen in the market that had made her believe something was possible here that wasn't possible anywhere else yet. Then she asked about the founding. Abena walked her through it from the beginning, the napkin sketch in the Accra coffee shop, the concept deck built over 3 weeks in a rented room in Mapogu before she'd found the studio, the first email to Do-yeon after a mutual contact had made the introduction, the meeting where she'd shown him the deck and watched his face move through the same sequence of expressions she'd seen on everyone who'd looked at it seriously. Surprise, then recognition, then the particular alertness of someone realizing they were looking at something they wanted to be part of. What did he bring to the partnership? Mihi asked, not leading, genuinely wanting the accurate picture. Connections, Abena said. Real ones. He knew the manufacturing contacts in Dongdaemun. He knew which showroom directors would take a meeting and which ones needed a longer runway. He understood the local business architecture in ways I didn't yet. That was real, and I want to be clear about it. I'm not here to say he contributed nothing. He contributed what he said he'd contribute in the beginning. And the creative work was mine, Abena said. From the first sketch to the last collection. The visual identity, the silhouette language, the color philosophy, the brand's entire relationship to its Ghanaian textile references as a foundation for something new rather than something nostalgic. That was my framework. It was mine before I met him, and it remained mine throughout. Did he ever claim otherwise, internally, before the profile? Abena considered the question honestly. He let credit distribute itself unevenly, she said. In meetings with buyers, with press, with the manufacturing partners, he spoke first, spoke most, and the room's attention followed him because that's how rooms work when one person is more comfortable occupying them. I was building things. He was describing the things I was building. It was subtle enough for long enough that I told myself it was just style. Different communication approaches. I told myself that right up until I read 11 pages about my own company and found out my name wasn't in any of them. Mihi wrote something. When the relationship ended, the personal one, did the dynamic change? It clarified, Abena said. While we were together, there was enough goodwill to paper over the imbalance. When that goodwill was gone, what was underneath it became visible. He started making decisions without consulting me. Commitments to press, to collaborators, to brand direction, things that were mine to decide, started being made before I was in the room. She paused. The profile was the end of a longer story. It wasn't an aberration. It was the destination that the last 18 months had been driving toward. Did you know that, while it was happening? I suspected it, Abena said. I chose not to act on the suspicion because I didn't have proof, and because I was still building. The collection I'm finishing right now, the one I've been working on through all of this, that collection is the best work I've ever done. I was protecting my focus. I told myself I'd deal with the structural problem when the creative work was done. She looked at Mihi steadily. He moved the timeline on me. Mihi set her pen down. I want to read you something from his interview. I want your response on record. She opened a printed transcript, found the passage, and read it. Do-yeon's account of the founding, his description of the visual identity's development, his language for the brand's aesthetic framework. Every sentence contained something Abena recognized as hers, translated into his vocabulary and delivered as autobiography. Abena listened without interrupting. When Mihi finished, she was quiet for a moment. The color philosophy he described, she said, the one he called an instinctive response to the collision of Korean minimalism and West African maximalism, I presented that framework to him in a document dated January 2020. I can show you the document. He's using my language to describe my thinking and presenting it as his instinct. She paused. That's the part that's hardest to sit with, not that he took the credit, that he took the vocabulary. The specific words I used to understand my own work and made them his story. Mihi closed the transcript. Something in her face had moved during the last answer, not unprofessional. She kept the recorder running and her pen ready. But the particular movement of a woman recognizing something she'd seen before and had never stopped being angry about. The photographer is going to come in now, Mihi said. I want to shoot you in your studio, not here. We'll send a car Thursday morning. I want the original sketches in the background, the framed ones, the wall with your handwriting on it. I want a visual record of your work behind your face. She paused. This cover is going to look different from the last one. Your name is going to be on it, in the right place. The photographer's name was Lee Jinho, and he worked the way Abena worked, quietly, specifically, with the focused efficiency of someone who didn't need to fill a room with noise to be sure of what he was doing. He spent 40 minutes in her studio on Thursday, and in that time he produced the image that would eventually become, in the industry's collective memory, the photograph most associated with her name. Abena standing at her cutting table, the framed concept sketches behind her, her handwriting visible on the original drawings, her expression the one she wore when she was working rather than performing, the particular quality of concentration that had nothing to prove and wasn't trying to. She didn't know yet that the photograph would become that. She found out later, the way you found out most things about your own legacy, after the fact, from other people who'd noticed before you had. Do-yeon's PR team called Mihi's office on Friday. Mihi told Abena about it in a brief text. His people have been in touch. They've requested the follow-up piece be held pending a legal review of the founding documents. I've declined. I wanted you to know before Monday. Abena read the text standing in her studio, needle in hand, mid-stitch on the final piece of the new collection. She set the needle down and called her lawyer, a Korean woman named Oh Sujin who'd handled her original partnership agreement and who Abena had kept on retainer, quietly, for 2 years, since the point when the imbalance had started to clarify itself, and some forward-looking part of her had understood that retaining a lawyer was the kind of preparation that looked like pessimism and functioned like wisdom. He's going to claim the documents are in dispute, Sujin said, after Abena had walked her through the week. He can't dispute the timestamps. Those are system-generated and unalterable. But he can claim joint authorship on the concept work and try to muddy the origin story enough to make the follow-up piece look like one side of a legitimate disagreement rather than a correction of a false record. Can he succeed at that? In court, with time, possibly enough to be inconvenient, Sujin said. In the court of the industry's opinion, reading a time-stamped concept deck dated 3 weeks before he'd met you, no. He cannot succeed at that. She paused. I'd like to send a letter to his legal team today. Not aggressive. Simply noting that you have the original documents, that they are time-stamped and their authorship metadata is intact, and that any claim of joint authorship will need to account for the documented chronology. Most lawyers, when they see what you actually have, will advise their client to let the press run rather than pursue a legal strategy that puts the founding documents into formal discovery. Do it, Abena said. Sujin's letter went out Friday afternoon. By Friday evening, Do-yeon's PR team had withdrawn the request to hold the piece. Abena found out from Mihi, again by text, legal review request withdrawn. We proceed as planned. Issue closes Tuesday, on stands in 3 weeks. She read it, set the phone down, picked up the needle. She had a collection to finish. The correction could wait 3 weeks. The work couldn't. Park Jae-soo from Lot called Saturday morning. I read the original profile again, Jae-soo said, without opening pleasantly. I've been your contact at Lot for 2 years. I've had one conversation with Shin Do-yeon in that time, at the brand's 2nd anniversary event for approximately 8 minutes. Every seasonal meeting, every buying decision, every conversation that led to the accounts we've built together, that was you. She paused. I want you to know that my relationship is with you. Whatever happens with the label, whatever the follow-up piece says, I'm telling you now so you have the information before you need to make any decisions. My account follows you. Abena held the phone and felt something she hadn't let herself feel since the buyer's first message 11 days ago. Not relief exactly, but the specific warmth of being known accurately by someone who'd paid attention. Thank you, Jae-soo, she said. That means more than I can tell you right now. You built it, Jae-soo said simply. I just wanted you to know that at least one person in this industry was paying enough attention to know that. The Hyundai buyer called Monday. The Hyundai boutique owner sent an email Tuesday, 2 days before the issue closed. That was 4 paragraphs long and ended with a line Abena read 3 times before closing her laptop. We stocked this label because of your eye. We'll stock whatever comes next for the same reason. She didn't tell Do-yeon about any of the calls. She didn't need to. He would find out the same way she'd found out about the profile, through the industry's attention, moving faster than anyone could manage. 3 weeks. The issue closed Tuesday, on stands in 3 weeks. She finished the collection on Wednesday night, the last stitch at 11:43 p.m., and stood back from the final piece and looked at 6 years of visual language made physical. Every reference, every decision, every color story and silhouette choice and textile conversation with her father's memory, all of it present in the work the way it was always present, not as statement, but as foundation. She photographed every piece herself, on Thursday morning, in the studio with the light she knew, because documentation was the habit her father had given her, and she wasn't going to stop now. She dated each photograph. Part 4 coming, the issue hit stands. The industry reacts, Do-yeon's response, and Abena makes the decision about the label. The issue hit stands on Thursday. Abena knew the exact moment it did because her phone started before she'd finished her morning coffee. Not calls yet, messages first. The way news always traveled in the industry, text before voice, screenshot before conversation. Jisoo sent the cover image at 8:47 a.m. without a caption because it didn't need one. Abena on the cover of Seoul Style magazine. Her name above the image in the magazine's clean serif typeface, the same typeface that had run Do-yeon's name 3 weeks earlier, except this time the name above the image matched the face in it. Her studio behind her, the framed concept sketches visible over her left shoulder, her handwriting readable on the original drawings for anyone who looked closely enough. The headline read, "The Woman Who Built It, Abena Mensah and the Reed Story of Seoul's Most Talked About Label." Inside, she knew without opening it yet, was the correction on the original profile. 3 paragraphs, positioned directly below the feature's opening spread. Mihi had shown her the layout proof the week before, had walked through every word with her, had given her approval rights on the correction language not because she was legally required to, but because she'd said, plainly, that the woman whose name the correction was restoring should have the final say on how it was restored. The correction read, in part, that the original profile had failed to credit Abena Mensah as co-founder and creative director of the label, and that the visual identity, brand aesthetic, and creative framework described in the original feature had originated with Ms. Mensah's documented concept work predating the label's formal founding. It was 6 sentences long, factual, and printed in the same font size as the body copy rather than in the small print footnote placement that corrections usually occupied. Mihi's deliberate decision, she'd told Abena, because small print corrections were how the industry apologized to itself without actually apologizing to anyone. The feature itself was 11 pages, the same length as Do-yeon's. Abena had read the final version twice before publication and had said, when Mihi asked if she was satisfied, that she was satisfied with its accuracy, which was the most important thing, and grateful for its existence, which was the second most important thing. What she hadn't been prepared for was the speed. By 10 a.m., the feature was being shared across every industry channel she knew, and several she didn't: designers, stylists, buyers, journalists, the specific ecosystem of a small industry where everyone knew everyone and information moved at the speed of professional gossip, but landed with the weight of public record. By noon, it had moved past the fashion industry into the broader Korean media conversation, picked up by 3 general interest outlets who ran brief summaries under headlines that varied in their restraint. By 2 p.m., Do-yeon had posted a statement on the label's official channels. She read it in her studio, standing at the cutting table with her finished collection hanging on the rack behind her. The statement was 4 paragraphs of the careful, lowered language of a man whose legal team had told him to acknowledge without conceding, to express without admitting, to position what had happened as a misunderstanding of process rather than a deliberate erasure. It described Abena as a valued creative collaborator. It expressed regret that the original profile had not fully represented the collaborative nature of the label's founding. It did not use the word apology. It did not use the word wrong. It did not use her name once. She read it twice, set her phone down, and felt something clarify in her chest that had been building since the moment the buyer's first message had arrived. Not anger. She'd moved through anger in the first 48 hours and come out the other side into something colder and more useful. Not satisfied either, not yet. Clarity. The specific, operational clarity of a decision that has been approaching for a long time and has finally arrived close enough to act on. She called Soojin. "The statement," Abena said. "He still didn't use my name." "I saw it," Soojin said. "I want to begin the process of separating from the label," Abena said. "Formally, clean, legal, documented. I want my name off the founding documents as anything that could be construed as ongoing endorsement of his version of the story, and I want my creative work. The original concept deck, the design archive, the visual identity framework, formally attributed to me in any future use. That's a negotiation, Sujin said. It'll take time. He'll resist the attribution clause specifically because it limits how he can use the brand's visual history going forward. I know, Abena said. Start it anyway. There's also the matter of the retail accounts, Sujin said carefully. The ones whose buyers have communicated directly that their relationship is personal to you. Those aren't contractually transferable in most partnership agreements. But if the buyers themselves choose to move their accounts, the label can't legally prevent them from doing it. It just has to happen through the buyer's own decisions, not yours. I understand, Abena said. I haven't asked any of them to move. I won't. You don't need to, Sujin said. They've already told you what they intend to do. The formal separation process began the following week. In the measured, document-heavy way legal processes began, letters exchanged between lawyers, positions stated, the slow architecture of an exit built one clause at a time. Do-Yun's team pushed back on the attribution clause immediately, as Sujin had predicted, arguing that the label's visual identity had been developed collaboratively, and that sole attribution to Abena was commercially damaging. Sujin responded with the time-stamped concept deck, the founding emails, and the authorship metadata from every original design file. The pushback on the attribution clause lasted 4 days. Then it stopped. Mihi called the Thursday after the issue ran, when the coverage had settled from its initial peak into the more durable second wave. The longer think pieces, the industry panel discussions. The specific kind of professional conversation that happened in meeting rooms and over lunches, and in the margins of other conversations. The kind that shaped reputations and directions over months rather than days. I want to tell you something, Mihi said. The response to this feature is unlike anything I've seen in 22 years at this magazine. Not in volume, we've had bigger numbers. In quality. The messages coming in aren't just people saying they enjoyed the piece. They're designers, specifically, telling me about their own versions of this story. Women who built something and watched the credit migrate. Some of them Korean, some of them foreign. Some of them have been in this industry for 20 years and have never told anyone. They're telling me now because you went on record. She paused. I want you to know that, because I think you should understand the full size of what you did when you sent me that folder. Abena was quiet for a moment. I sent you the folder because my name wasn't on a cover it should have been on. I know, Mihi said. That's exactly why it mattered to everyone else. 3 weeks after the issue ran, the lot account formally transferred. Park Jae-soo handled it herself, through proper channels, with the clean procedural efficiency of a buyer who'd made her decision before the issue hit stands and was now simply executing it. The Hyundai account followed the week after. The Hyundai boutique had already been in quiet conversations with Sujin about a direct relationship with Abena's new independent operation. An operation that didn't have a name yet. A studio that was still technically the one she'd been working in for 6 years. A brand that existed so far only in a finished collection hanging on a rack, and a folder of new concept work she'd been building in the margins of everything else. She registered the business name on a Tuesday morning. Mensah, clean and unambiguous, the name her father had given her, and that she'd spent 6 years putting on everything she made without it appearing in any headline. She announced it the same day, a single post on the label's industry channels, one image, the photograph Lee Jinho had taken in her studio, the one with the concept sketches behind her and her handwriting visible, and a single line of text beneath it. Building, as always, this time under the right name. Her phone ran warm for the rest of the day. Do-Yun did not respond publicly. His label continued operating. It had the infrastructure, the manufacturing contacts, the showroom relationships he'd built on his side of the partnership. What it didn't have, going forward, was the visual framework that had made it recognizable, or the retail relationships that had made it commercially viable, or the creative director whose eye had made it worth writing about in the first place. The industry noticed the absence the way it always noticed absences. Not loudly, not immediately, but in the accumulating silence of a brand that kept producing work without the thing that had made the work worth looking at. Abena noticed it too, and filed it away without comment, because she had a new collection to build and a label to launch and considerably more interesting things to occupy her attention than the diminishing of something she'd already left behind. She called her mother that evening, her mother in Accra, who'd been following the coverage through WhatsApp forwards from relatives who'd seen the Seoul-style cover shared in Ghanaian professional circles, which was its own kind of reach she hadn't anticipated. "Your father would have said something insufferable about documentation," her mother said. Abena laughed, the first full laugh in 3 weeks, genuine and unguarded, the kind that arrived when the last of the tension finally released. "He would have," she said. "He would have said I told you so about the dates on the sketches." "He did tell you," her mother said. 17 years ago in the warehouse." "I know," Abena said. "I was listening." Mensah launched on a Tuesday in early spring, which Abena had chosen deliberately, not a Friday, when launches competed with weekend noise, not a Monday, when the industry was still finding its feet after the weekend. Tuesday was a working day in every sense, a day for people who were actually paying attention. The launch show was small by the standards of the industry she'd been operating in 40 guests. A converted warehouse space in Seoul that she'd found through a textile contact, and had spent 3 weekends transforming with a team of 4, her own hands in the work the way they'd always been in the work, because she'd never been the kind of creative director who directed from a distance. The space was deliberately bare. White walls, industrial ceiling, the kind of room that didn't compete with what was shown inside it. The lighting was warm and directional, the kind that showed fabric accurately rather than flatteringly, because she'd always believed that work which needed flattering light wasn't finished work. The collection was 12 pieces. Not 40. Not the sprawling seasonal statement of a label with investors to impress and wholesale accounts to fill. 12 pieces that said, without a single word of accompanying text, exactly what 6 years of building someone else's visual language had taught her about her own. Ghanaian textile references were present but not decorative, not the surface application of cultural signifiers that the fashion industry often rewarded, the kind of referencing that functioned as aesthetic borrowing without structural understanding. They were load-bearing. The Kente-derived geometry wasn't a print applied to a Western silhouette. It was the silhouette's architecture, the structural logic of the garment's construction built from the same mathematical relationships that organized the weave. Her father's warehouse, her mother's hands, 20 years of understanding fabric as language before she'd understood it as fashion. All of it present in 12 pieces that looked like nothing else in the room, because they'd come from a place nothing else in the room had access to. Jisoo was in the front row, which was not a coincidence because nothing about the seating had been accidental. Mihi was 3 seats down, a notebook open on her knee, not for a feature, she'd told Abena beforehand, just for herself, the way she attended things that mattered to her personally rather than professionally, though in 22 years the distinction had become harder to maintain. Lee Jinho, the photographer who'd shot the Seoul-style cover, was there at Abena's invitation, working quietly along the perimeter the way he always worked, finding the images that told the story accurately rather than the ones that told it prettily. The show lasted 22 minutes. When it ended, the room was quiet for a moment in the specific way rooms go quiet when something has happened that hasn't been processed yet. Not stunned, not politely restrained, but the genuine silence of 40 people simultaneously encountering something they needed a second to understand before they could respond to it. Then Jisoo started clapping, which broke it, and the room followed. Abena stood at the end of the small runway space in a simple dark dress, the same composed posture she'd had at the dinner table in the hospital corridor in the board, meeting in every room that had tried to make her feel like a visitor in her own story. And she let the response arrive without performing anything in return. She didn't cry. She'd cried in her studio the night before, alone, going over the final pieces one last time, feeling the full weight of what it had taken to arrive at this particular Tuesday. And by morning, the tears had done what tears do when you let them finish properly, which was to leave something cleaner behind them. She bowed once briefly and went back to work. The coverage came in the days after, the way coverage came when something landed cleanly. Not a flood, but a steady, durable accumulation. Mihi wrote a personal essay rather than a formal review, published on Seoul Style's digital platform, that described the show as the most coherent debut collection she'd attended in a decade, and that described Abena, specifically, as a designer whose visual language had been fully formed before the industry knew her name, which was, she wrote, the industry's failure rather than the designer's. The essay ran without a formal correction attached to it, because it didn't need one. It was simply accurate, the way the follow-up feature had been accurate, the way Abena's time-stamped files had been accurate. The same truth, stated in 3 different registers, each one reinforcing the others until the record was too complete and too public to be rewritten by anyone whose interest lay in a different version. Jisoo placed the first wholesale order the morning after the show, before the coverage had fully settled, which told Abena that the decision had been made during the show rather than after it. Jisoo was the kind of buyer who knew what she was looking at before the last piece had come down the runway. The Hyundai buyer followed that afternoon. The Hongdae boutique owner called personally rather than emailing, which she'd never done before, and spent 12 minutes on the phone describing, with the specific enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting to say this for a while, exactly which 3 pieces she wanted and why. 3 accounts. The same 3 accounts that had followed her out of the label, because their relationships had always been with her eye rather than with the name above the door. Abena wrote down each order in the same notebook she'd been using for 6 years, with the same habit her father had given her, date at the top of the page, every detail recorded, nothing trusted to memory that could be trusted to paper. Doyeon's label released its next seasonal collection, 6 weeks after Mensah's launch. The coverage was polite and brief. The work was competent. It had the infrastructure, the manufacturing contacts, the showroom relationships, the operational machinery of a label that had been running for 6 years. What it produced, without the visual framework that had made it distinctive, was the kind of fashion that filled a market slot without claiming a cultural space. Reviewers found it difficult to describe in terms that went beyond the functional. Several of them, Abena noticed without taking any particular pleasure in noticing, used the word generic in contexts where they might previously have used words she'd put there herself. She noticed it. She filed it. She returned to the new collection she was already building, because Mensah had a second season to prepare for, and she was, as she had always been, most fully herself when she was working. Her father had told her once, she'd been 12, standing in the warehouse between bolts of fabric he was cataloging, watching him write the date on every tag, that the most dangerous thing a person who made things could do was let someone else hold the record of what they'd made. She'd understood it intellectually at 12. She understood it in her body now, in the muscle memory of dadding every sketch, saving every email, building a folder of evidence not out of suspicion, but out of the simple, disciplined love of her own work, the refusal to make something and then hold it loosely, as though it might not have been hers to begin with. It had always been hers. The record had always said so. She'd simply made sure, when the moment came, that the right people knew how to read it. She called her mother on the evening of the show, after the guests had gone and the warehouse was being quietly dismantled by the same 4 people who'd built it, sitting on the edge of the empty runway with her shoes off and the 12 pieces still hanging on their rails behind her. "How was it?" her mother asked. "It was what I meant it to be," Abena said. "Every piece, every decision, nothing compromised." "Nothing compromised," her mother repeated, the way she repeated things she wanted to sit with properly. "Your father used to say that about the warehouse, that he'd rather have less that was exactly right than more that was almost right." "I know," Abena said. "I got that from him." "You got most of the important things from him," her mother said. "The dadding of documents, the not letting go of things you made, the knowing that your name belongs on your work." She paused. "And the stubbornness. You got that from him too." "I know," Abena said again. Good, her mother said. Don't lose it. Abena looked at 12 pieces hanging in a bare warehouse in Seongsudong, Seoul, each one dated, documented, undeniably hers, and thought about a textile warehouse in Accra, and a father who'd taught her that the record was sacred, and 6 years of building something in a city that hadn't known her name, and the Tuesday morning she'd registered Mensah with her own hand and felt, for the first time in longer than she could precisely measure, that the room she was standing in had been built to exactly the right dimensions. She hadn't needed anyone to invite her in. She'd simply kept the record until the room had no reasonable choice but to carry her name correctly. He had told Seoul she was nobody. Seoul, it turned out, had been paying attention all along. It had simply been waiting for her to show it what it had been looking at.